Hi, and welcome back to Statistical Methods and Analysis for the NNU Graduate Program online. We're in Chapter 2 now, and Chapter 2 we're going to be dealing with central tendencies and measures of central tendency. Computing the mean, median, and mode is what we're going to be starting with here. As we look here, measures of central tendencies are things we're going to be talking about. Computing the mean for a set of scores, computing the mode and the median for data sets, and then selecting a measure of central tendency that best works for us. Alright, so we start out, average is a single score that best describes the data set. So think of this, you have a class of 30 kids. Their average score for the test is 75. What that's saying is if you take all your scores, add them up, divide them by that 30 that you have, you'll get a 75% average or best representation of how your class did on a test. Average is also known as a measure of central tendency. It's what's going on in the center of that data set. The center of my class is right about a 75%. Three different ways to describe distribution: mean, median, and mode. Mean, typically average scores. The median is the middle, so if we line them up from least to greatest, it's the one directly in the middle. Last one is mode. It's what one shows up the most common. What score typically shows up by the most number of your kids. That's the best way to think of it. Alright, so computing the mean, here's our formula right here. It's x bar divided by the summation of x divided by n. Well, what does all that mean? It doesn't really mean a whole lot to you. You're going to take all your scores, x, the big X, you're going to add those up, that's what the summation means, and then you're going to divide that by n, which is how many's in that sample. If there's a 30 kids in your class, there's a 30 sample set. So your sample set has 30 people in them. So you take all their scores divided by 30 and you come up with that 75 like we used on the last one. This is just describing our equation up there, so make sure you know how to do that. Alright, things you need to remember. Big N refers to your population. If you're using the entire population, it's big N. Little n is your sample. Sample mean is a measure of central tendency that best represents a population. Alright, so taking one of my 5 Algebra 1 classes, I want to see what best represents it. I take their average, I say they got a 74%. I'm using that to say my average algebra score is 74%. Well, it's not all my algebra scores. It's not even all the algebra scores in the entire school. It's just a sample of my class. It's a small part of the entire population. Mean is very sensitive to extreme scores. So I have all these kids, these 30 kids, and 29 of them are scoring between 60 and 95%. But what about that kid that scored a 22% on the test? That's an extremely sensitive thing. It's way out of the normal range. So how do we deal with that? That's what we're going to be talking about later on in the book. But that is one thing that mean is very sensitive to. Average means that average means the one measure that best represents the set of scores, okay? That's your average. Just means what best represents that set of scores. Different types of average, that's a mean, median, mode, what one best represents it. And then types of average used depend on the data set and the question a lot of times, depending on the question. You'll hear a lot of times on the news too that your mean housing price is, well, it doesn't want all the houses added together divided by how many there are. It wants to know from the least valuable to the most expensive what's a dead middle. And that's what it's talking about, is when we figure out what the exact middle is. That would be a good one for a median example. A mean, take your test scores again, add them all up, divide them by how many you have. That's a good example of a mean. Alright, computing the median. Median, you take all your numbers, put them in order from least to greatest, count, find the exact center. There's no special science for median. You just want to find that middle ground. So this one says, but what if there's 2 middle scores? That's pretty simple to do when you add them up, put them in order. You have 2 middle scores like 20 and 22, and they're both right in the middle. You're going to take 20, add it to 22 to get 42, and then divide it by 2. It's going to give you your true median, which is 21. Okay, a little bit about percentiles. We're using all this to get to percentiles. A lot of you sat in IEP meetings, you hear about the percentile rank. All that's saying is that's where 75% of the scores are above or below that line. So if you look at this one, the 75 75th percentile means that the scores received is at or above 75% of all other scores. Now, we're going to make a big thing here, is it has to be distributed normally. And we'll talk about what it means to be normally distributed later on in this class. But we're saying this kid scores up in the 75th percentile. That means he is in the 75 or higher percentile. A lot of your IEP students are down there in the first, second, third percentile. And your site coordinator or your school counselor will pull out a normal curve and they'll say he's down here in the third percentile and that's why he needs accommodations. So that's something to keep in mind when you're sitting in one of those IEP meetings and not really sure what they're asking. All right, comparing the mode, you're just going to figure out what one shows up the most frequently. Example here, we had a survey of Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. You notice that there's 140 independents. That's the mode because that's the most. 90 Democrats, 70 Republicans. So it's just what shows up the most often, and that's how we get the mode. All right, use the mode when data is categorical. So red socks, blue socks, green socks, what one shows up the most? Categories. Use the median when you have extreme scores. So the housing prices we were talking about earlier, in Idaho, most of our housing prices are between $100,000 and $250,000. But there's those extreme housing, or those extreme houses that are a couple $1 million. Those are outliers. So we want to use the median so we take care of those outliers and we get a better description of what the housing market in Idaho looks like. We want to use the mean when you have data that do not include extreme scores and are not categorized. All right, best one I can use, I played college baseball, batting average in baseball. You go up there, you get hit or you don't. You have 4 at-bats in a game, you get hit 1 out of 4, you take 1 divided by 4, your mean is 25% of the time you get a hit. A lot of times you'll use those means on tests to best describe to a class how they did on a test. All right, glossary terms again, you should keep a notebook on these. We got average, measure essential tendency, mean, median, and mode. In the mean, we got weighted mean, arithmetic mean. In the median, we have percentile points and outliers. Those are things you're going to want to know about. So make sure you keep that in that notebook so that when you get to that at a later time and date, you'll know what is going on there. All right, that brings us to the end of Chapter 2. Feel free to watch this again if you need some more tips on it, or video for Chapter 3 will be up shortly. Thank you.